Welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jay Wojciechowski.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
And today we are discussing two things. First, we're going to discuss my recent cutback from Facebook. And second, we are going to discuss mindful apologies. And I want to start off with a quote by Abraham Hicks. It is,
Ah,
"It is not your role to make others happy. It is your role to keep yourself in balance. When you pay attention to how you feel and practice self-empowering thoughts that align with who you really are, you will offer an example of thriving that will be a tremendous value to those who have the benefit of observing you."
I
It's so
love that.
good.
That one part where you said the thoughts that align with who you really are, I like literally felt like my heart swell. I was like, that sounds so good. Love
And
it.
this is a quote I've always loved, but uh, I've been finding myself. So the Facebook experiment is I took Facebook off my phone. So I haven't left Facebook. I can still check it on my computer, but I was just finding that I had developed a habit of checking it a little too much, of just it not being a conscious choice, but just something that I was doing out of habit. And I feel like it was becoming harder and harder to remain mindful. And I don't know if this is exclusively a Facebook problem or if it was just a problem in my feed and my network and knowing a lot of activists and stuff. It was just getting very negative and daunting. There was no balance. Uh, like, I don't expect social media to be just constant positivity, but I think to use it mindfully, there has to be a balance between how you're expressing yourself and the energy you're putting into it. And I feel like Facebook specifically is getting more and more negative. Even in the issues I care about, when people talk about them, it's almost always through an anger, negative lens, and very rarely, if really ever, a mindful trying to find a positive sort of lens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, so I have done the same thing in the past. I've taken Facebook off my phone and it's now on my phone, but it's less accessible. And so because I noticed a lot of the same things that you're talking about. And, I kind of took those first steps. And we had even talked about this, I think, actually at the beginning of this year in our January kind of setting intentions for the year. I remember you mentioning how to change who you follow or change what shows up first on your feed and talking about that and putting certain things first. And so I did that and did find that helpful. But like you're saying, even in those things that are oftentimes in the past I found nourishing, more positive, more kind of just not draining. I was feeling like something was being taken. Like I was feeling just drained and I was feeling like a pull from my energy spending
Right.
time on it, but also feeling this like just this automatic reaction of checking it. Like if it's there and I see it, I would pick up my phone to send an email. But that F, that that big blue F, just next thing I know, I'm on Facebook and I don't even really realize it because it's just kind of that automatic reaction. Oh, there's Facebook. Oh, there's a notification, even though I turned the notifications off years ago, of just checking it and just kind of this automatic response. And so I'm interested to see for you, since you made that decision and took Facebook off your phone, how long has it been?
It's been about a week.
About a week. So what's been your experience since you've done that?
It's been wonderful. I guess my fear going into it was that uh, other social media platforms would kind of take its place,
Mhm.
which hasn't happened. Uh, and I guess it was my fear, but I also, when I was looking at the other, Twitter and Instagram specifically, I think Instagram in general is a more positive space just because it seems like the mass purpose of Instagram is to be positive and to kind of show the activities and the things you're enjoying in life. There's not much ranting or kind of, I guess, therapeutic use in the.
It's not as much
I mean, it's
venting.
right. It's therapeutic, but just not in the way of having to kind of release whatever you're holding on to, if that makes sense. Where I feel like Facebook is, and the thing with Twitter, I think Twitter is a vastly negative platform, but I think it's more customizable to make it positive. So I pretty much exclusively look at Twitter through TweetDeck,
Oh,
which
right. Yeah.
just shows my activity and then my lists. So I don't even see my feed. And my lists are pretty much all mindfulness people in different categories. So I make sure that the people I do see are mostly mindful. So there's not as much as a problem there. But I haven't been checking either of those, I think, more than I had before. And what
Right.
I've found is I have free time, which I never thought I had before. I always thought I was so busy, and now I realize no, there was a lot more time that I do have to do either work or meditate or just self reflect or whatever it is that
Connect with people, like
right
actually
that
experience
Facebook was
life. Yeah.
right that Facebook was taking, and I wasn't even aware that I was putting that much time into it. And
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
other thing is, yeah, I just feel like I feel more mindful and more positive.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I think that might be a combination of one, potentially getting off Facebook, but also that the purpose and the intention of getting off Facebook was to become more mindful. So I think I'm still in that, I'm still aware of it. So that a lot of that could just be me being conscious of wanting to be more mindful.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but I'm also seeing it's
Which,
very interesting. What was happening was, and we can transition because I know you want to talk specifically about some of the issues with sexual assault and abuse that have been happening. But
but I
I've
want to go in
been,
this even more. Yeah.
yeah,
I
I've been
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
so hesitant to talk about that topic and to really talk about anything political or that's really going on, because it's just so draining from getting the resources from Facebook, because I feel like the conversations on all sides are so unmindful and so driven just by kind of a desire to judge and anger, which I understand, but I think when that's all you see, it's hard to then step back and find kind of the mindful way in, which is the struggle I was having. And as soon as I cut Facebook off and was able to self reflect for myself, as opposed to seeing, I guess, all the communication about it, I was able to see those issues from a much more mindful place.
Yeah. I think that's a really good kind of way to describe how that happens when I think when we're on Facebook, when we're getting constant information, constant opinions about things, we're consuming that. And like I think that we've become very aware of what we're consuming, food wise, what we're putting into our bodies. But I think that recognizing that even what we're scrolling and reading and participating in online, we consume. And when we do that, like it brings us it we have to kind of find a way to like diffuse that and manage that and kind of transmute that energy into something. And so we don't really have anything left to actually have a mindful thought about it because we're so busy just kind of like filtering out and just trying to kind of tease out what energy we've taken in from it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but I think that recognition that, because I think a lot of times people, we're very addicted to being informed. And I think we have this idea, and I think especially people who consider themselves, well informed and smart people and want to, kind of be aware of what's going on. I think it's hard because there's that fine line of like overconsumption where then you're not able to even allow yourself to have a mindful thought about it and to even reflect in a way that's effective. And so I think that's what you kind of experienced, is that ability when you took Facebook out of the mix, and that automatic, let me put more information in and consume more before I've even digested what what I consumed yesterday. I think that's what we experience. And it's like you don't know that it's happening until it's gone. And I think that was that experience for me when I took Facebook off my phone. I loved it. And like, I didn't put it back because I missed it. And like, I didn't put it back because I was like, oh, I really want to know what everybody in my life's opinions are on every single news story. I think part of my issue and my struggle with Facebook is that it's a lot more personal because it's the people in your life, it's your family, it's your friends. And we're at a time where I honestly, for me to be mindful, I don't need to know everybody's opinion about everything that happens because that creates again more noise and so I think I tend to enjoy Twitter more, even though it's a very yucky space a lot of times because it's detached in that way. But yeah, so I think for me, like I didn't miss it. I ended up putting it back on my phone and burying it in a folder, like at the back on its own page so that I don't see it there. So I don't have that automatic response. But I was noticing for my other social media platforms when I would try to cross post something, because I'm still trying to maintain my Facebook accounts and I have business accounts that I added. And so I'm still trying to do that. I would find that I couldn't cross post and then I would have to like go in and do an extra step of going onto the computer and you can only log on to Instagram from your mobile, blah. So it became this thing where I was like, okay, so I'm going to put it back on my phone, but I'm going to hide it. And actually that's been extremely effective for me because I find that like days will go by where I won't be on Facebook.
Right. Yeah, I think two things is I think that is the big difference between specifically Twitter and Facebook is the personal nature of Facebook, because I do think in general Twitter is a more angry, reactive, unmindful space.
Mm-hmm.
But on Facebook, if I see someone being unmindful and angry and upset, I want to engage
Right.
to
Right.
kind of bring
But,
them into a mindful space because I know them. Where
yes.
on Twitter, I almost never feel an urge to engage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think that's the big difference for me. That one, I don't want to say negative thing about it, but the thing I did have to adjust wanting to be a well-informed individual is I didn't realize how much information I was consuming through Facebook, that when I didn't have it, I wasn't actually 100%. It just took me a little bit to think about where am I going to find my news and actually go find it, as opposed to it kind of just being there at my fingertips. And I trust most of the things that I see on my news feed just because, one, I have a good kind of censor for what's fake and what's not based on what's being what sources there are and things like that. But also a lot of the people I follow are activists and are in it, so they're posting things that their organizations and they have kind of sussed out. It's not just
Right.
anything. I mean, every once in a while there's something that I'm like, that's blatantly fake, even though the person sharing it clearly thinks it's not. But
Mm-hmm.
that was I guess a challenge for me, and I ended up just using Google Now and kind of setting up what kind of news is important to me, and then I just check that, and it's just a running of the news, and it kind of
Yeah.
does the same thing. And the nice thing about that, though, I will say too, is that it's nice to read the news without having anyone's opinions added to it first, which I think is a lot of the problem with Facebook, is people read the comments before they even read the article. So they already have an idea of how they're going to feel about it. And I've seen that a lot
Read the
recently
article,
where,
what?
yeah, people
Just
were,
read the headline in the comments and you're good.
right. And I've seen also a lot of people lately post an article that they clearly found without reading any of the comments or anything, and they'll post their opinion, and then after seeing other people's opinions and doing more thing, they'll change what they thought, which I think is a back and forth thing. I think that's a good. I think that's good in that you're open to new information and you're letting it affect you, but at the same time, sometimes that new information is very unmindful and very anger based and isn't necessarily the best I guess information to affect how you're feeling and how you're taking in that information.
And I mean, I think like that willingness to correct something that you posted, like that, I appreciate that. I think that's a positive thing. I think we all need to be willing to like correct something that we've said or correct something that we've posted. Honestly, I think that's been one of my biggest fears of even doing something like this, of talking publicly about what I think about stuff, is because what I think about stuff changes so much as I grow and learn. And so I think that, that's an important thing. And so I don't mind that, but I think a lot of times people will do that and have the hindsight and they'll correct it out of shame for feeling wrong or not seeing a point that somebody made, but they don't do that mindful piece of then trying to do the growth work of saying, okay, so how can I not do this next time? Maybe read the full article, maybe check some more sources, and kind of do that next piece of how not to do that again, and so people will kind of, just because I think a lot of times it's more, again, that shame of like, oh, somebody commented and said something that I didn't know, and now I've looked and I'm like, oh crap, let me just like
Right.
change it and hope that nobody saw, and so I think that's the hard part, is that there can really be some way to be mindful about that, and to really kind of learn and correct and learn how to be more um just more careful about what you're sharing, about what you're posting, than people are. I think
Yeah.
that's that work piece that's harder. But I think for you, without having Facebook and having to seek out your news, that like is not automatic mindfulness, but it's going to make you intentionally, like, you're going to be more mindful just in that process, because you have to look and say, okay, well, where do I want to go to look for this? What am I interested in? And seek things out versus just being fed whatever your family friend, because I mean, I like, my Facebook is full of so many people that I don't even really know that well, you know what I mean? Like, thinking about just kind of the connection sometimes, and how like loose they can be, but how much they're influencing us by how much they're able to like fuel us if we allow it. So
Right. And I think too, it's interesting, uh, communication wise, the differences between communication over social media platforms and actual communication, because actually talking to someone, having the verbal cues, seeing them, uh, is such a different experience than getting everything through typed words. And I think what ends up happening is that, on social media, things people try to put things in such black and white spaces. So we were talking about people editing themselves after opinions. What I see is, in a lot of the editing, is that it ends up being a fight of who was right or wrong, or the person admitting they were wrong. And so many times I see it and I was like, well, you just interpreted it differently, like the tone and everything. So it's not necessary that you one of you were wrong, one of you were right. You just read it differently, and both the way you're seeing it is valid, and it's more mindful. And I think it's more productive if we're able to get to a point where we can acknowledge that and then discuss, well, why did I see it differently than you, and what's the nuances here, as opposed to it being, just this way or that way, which is really what, I had three instances in a row where I posted something and then people got very defensive, and then I was trying to have that conversation of like, well, the way you see it is very valid, but let's like kind of suss out the mindfulness of like, why are some people seeing it this way and some people seeing it that way, and what's the complexities of it, instead of just making it one way or another. And, people just didn't want to go there, and that's when I realized this isn't the best. This isn't where I need to be spending my time. It's not being, effective.
right, it's not an effective use of your energy. Yeah, yeah. Well, should we transition? Is this a good spot? Because I'm
I think
excited,
so.
kind of eager to talk about the art of the mindful apology, because I think that, so in the last month, with all of the sexual harassment and sexual assault that is coming out, and just all of these, just more awareness, more talk about it, which I think is important and needs to happen. One thing that's interesting to me is that there's immediately, I'm noticing, and there's a lot of publicity around apologies and the apologies that are being issued. And honestly, and I mean, I will say that I have not read every single one, because I do think that this is also a situation where it's important to be mindful of how much you're consuming, because these are very, very difficult topics, very triggering topics. And so I have, in the interest of my own self care, I haven't read everything that's happened, but I've read enough of a lot of the apologies to be really frustrated by it, and to just kind of feel like we need to really talk about how, what's the purpose of an apology, and if the purpose of an apology is what I think it is, then how do we do it in a way that actually serves who it's for? Because I think a lot of these apologies that we're seeing are very self-serving, and what that creates is re-victimizing people who have already been victimized and have already experienced, have already been victimized, and now they're being re-victimized again or re-traumatized again by the apology. So like, I'll give an example. So one of the things is that, like, a lot of the apologies, someone will start off, they'll say, like, first sentence, I'm sorry for whatever. First thing is that a lot of times if somebody starts an apology with if I, which if you started your apology with if I did blank, like, start over, because you've already missed the mark. You've already made it about you, because you've already invalidated that person by doubting what they're saying. If you're apologizing for something, then someone is saying that something happened. And so starting off an apology, and so I think I haven't seen a lot of those if I apologies. Well, actually a little bit. They've been mixed in. But starting off an apology and then immediately going to, but that wasn't my intention. And so my intention was to make a joke. So the most recent one that really kind of triggered me to think about this was seeing what Senator Al Franken said in his recent apology to the woman who had a photo of him while she was sleeping, like making a motion of groping her breast. And, he said something like, my intention was to just make a joke, or I just thought it would be funny. But what happens is that takes the mindfulness out of the apology. Like, that immediately made it about him, of saying, this wasn't my intention, because from my perspective, if you victimize somebody, if you've hurt someone else, if you've violated another person, then your intention doesn't matter when you're making that apology. And I'm not saying your intention doesn't matter ever, because I do think, like, your intention matters when you're working on it, when you're with your therapist, when you're going to do the treatment that people also like to include and talk about what they're going to do in these apologies and how they're going to change and make promises about all the stuff they're going to do to kind of make everything better, which I think is also problematic. It's already turning it about you, and it's taking something away from that person, because your intention, again, doesn't matter if you victimize someone else. If someone is hurt, then that needs to be what that apology is about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, like, that's one thing that I think is super important, is that just recognizing, like, if you're intending to apologize for something, then leave it at that. Like, make your apology, but to start to talk about, well, I grew up in a different era, right? I grew up in the 50s, and that was just how it was, and all of these other things, that's not an apology. And now you've turned it into something else, because you're basically asking that victim to forgive you, like, to accept what you did, and to not be able to feel what they felt. And again, I think that your intentions do matter in healing spaces, and I think that that's important. And so if you really want to improve and change and work on this stuff, that's not overnight issues. I work with people for years for things that are not as deep as these issues can be. And so this idea that you can, like, go to somewhere for a week and get 1 week of intensive therapy, and you're going to come out and, like, let me back into the fold and accept me back in, and I'm okay, apology accepted, let's all move on, is, again, that's also really it's really ineffective, it's invalidating, and it's totally about you and your own ego of just wanting to be forgiven before you've actually really done any of the work to change. A more mindful apology would be, I'm really sorry that I did blank. and leaving it at that, and not even promising I'm going to, again, do all of these things, because you don't know. This stuff is not an easy fix. And so this idea that like I can go somewhere for a week and I'm not going to victimize somebody else is just not, it's not mindful, And so that's kind of what really came out for me as I have been thinking about this and just thinking about my own thoughts around it and just kind of where we can bring some mindfulness to it. I thought, well, these apologies really need a lot of work because they're really not that.
Yeah, I think the challenge in I guess these type of apologies are that they're not, as someone in the entertainment industry, these aren't necessarily apologies, they're public statements, right?
100%.
So the
Yep.
the thing we have to talk about is, well, what's the role of the public statement? Because I think the role that a lot of the public sees is a different role than what your PR rep is going to teach you they mean. So when I've worked with PR people, public statements, including apologies, we are taught that they are not apologies. They are not supposed to be personal exchanges. They are supposed to be addressing the public, which then from
Apologizing to the public, no?
what was that?
Not, but apologizing to the public, no?
You can, yes, you can apologize to the public, but it's more of a mass. It would be a mass apology. So like in these specific instances of sexual harassment, they're not necessarily apologies to the individual women who you are talking about in it. Is how, I'm not saying that's right, wrong, whatever. I'm just saying that's how the PR will tell people that need to make these statements what they are. So then I think there's then the disconnect between the actual public and how they see them. Because I think some people do see them as, well, they're making a general statement. And I think some other people expect it to be this is their apology. So I think it's hard, I think, for them to, and it's not making excuses for anyone in any of it, but I think it's hard being in it to be mindful, because the messages that you're getting are, you're being told different things. Totally. So then you're trying to navigate, and I see it when I read them. I see things that they're doing, and I'm like, I know exactly what you're doing and what you were told and why you're adding these statements. Like the Louis C.K. one is a great example of that was not meant. He did not write that as an apology to those women. He wrote that as a public statement of what he feels are the next steps to stopping or like fixing the problem of what he was told and what he feels the problem is. So that's why he was talking.
Like, what is the intention behind it? So if it's not to apologize to the people that were victimized, like, what is it? Is it just, what's the intention behind like the public statement, would you say?
I mean, from a corporate perspective, from a PR perspective, it's to stop the bleeding, right? So I mean, it's not mindful, it's not compassionate, it's not empathy. It's to stop the negative press and to try to rebound your career and leave with as much dignity as you can. And I think that's the main problem, and that itself, it's not mindful. So that's why I think you get a lot of people denying it, and they'll deny till they can't anymore, because they're not actually processing it from a place of empathy or compassion or wanting to do the right thing. Even if they genuinely do, they're processing it from, well, where am I right now? How much damage has been done? What's the answer that's going to hopefully stop the damage? So they'll just say, I didn't do it until they're totally caught and they can't, saying I didn't do it's going to cause more damage. Then they'll reverse. Yes, they'll reverse what they say and try to do a different tactic. So it's hard, and I think that is a lot of this stuff is what triggered me wanting to have some time away from Facebook, because it's just so frustrating to see so many activists and so many people incapable of being mindful around the topic, and I totally get it because it's just an intense and there is so much anger and
And
everything
personal
about it.
experience with it. I think
Right.
anger also personal experience because it's so pervasive. It's so
Right.
pervasive. And so I think that's the other part is that it's personal for so many people.
And it's that thing we talk about where when someone or something is so unmindful, it takes that much more energy to stay mindful. And because so much about the public statements and everything is so clinical and corporatized, and it's not about being mindful, it's hard to then engage in a mindful way. So I
Right.
understand
Right.
why people aren't being mindful about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also then how do you fix it? Because I see it from both sides because I'm in the industry. The whole idea that this person is a brand, so everyone involved with that brand is trying to stop the bleeding, and then you have these people over here that are actually a lot of times trying to do the right thing that lose out because the corporate side often wins. But then that's why I think that the Louis C.K. thing was interesting because it seemed like he was trying to find a balance, which I think a lot of people thought he found and a lot of people thought he didn't at all. But
Mm-hmm.
that's why I thought it was a very interesting
It was different.
statement because it
Yeah.
was different because it seemed like he was trying to incorporate both elements as
Yes.
opposed to most people who pick one or the other.
Right. And it felt his, I guess what was difficult for me about is that it felt very labored. It felt very like he
Mm-hmm.
was intentionally pulling all this extra stuff into like doing these gymnastics to try to touch on these things, which now that I'm talking to you and hearing that industry insider tip, it makes sense to me because I see what he was trying to do. But that's why I was like, really felt like, well, whereas a lot of people read it and felt like it was pretty mindful and different, I was kind of like, there was just so much that like the apology was lost in that it felt like a lot of noise to me,
Right. And I feel
and a lot
like
of noise again intended to salvage his position and kind of
mhm.
and to save where he's at. And I think the hard thing is that like we're so quick to do that when like a lot of times natural consequences to things will, I think, allow that period of self-reflection to happen. I think that like because we're so conditioned to kind of rally around and again for good reason because there are people that are fully supported by these people's brands and these people's industry. So it makes sense to me why that happens, but I think that that scramble to make it all better and is what takes away from the opportunity to actually reflect and learn and kind of actually do anything mindful with it. And I think
Right.
and for me, what I see that continues to happen is that those that have been victimized by this person continue to go unseen or unheard or invalidated.
Right. And I think too, I think that using the Louis C.K. Apology as an example is uh, the reason I think it was obvious that he was trying to salvage as much of his career as he could is because of how labored and how many different kind of statements he tried to make. So he tried to issue an apology while bringing light to what he thought the problem was, while defending himself to a point. He was trying to do it all, as opposed to if, and I think this is what I was talking about too about muddying the water and how we can make these apologies more mindful is do what you're trying to do.
Right.
If if
Stick
if
to
the
that.
if the issue if what you're trying to do is apologize, then apologize. And when the apology's over, leave it at that. You can have another moment. I mean, if he would have just apologized, because a
Uh-huh.
lot of the things he said I thought were important to the issue, whether he's the
Yes.
right person
Yes.
to deliver it, but that wasn't the time to talk about it. Talk about it later after
Yes.
the apology has been issued and it's a real apology and people are wanting to listen to then what you have to say or don't, you know?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Take all the rest of it out of the apology. Have the apology stand alone and truly be an apology. Because again, like apologies are uncomfortable. like apologies are a humbling, vulnerable moment, and they're supposed to be uncomfortable because we did something to hurt someone else. We violated somebody. And so just allowing yourself to like sit in that and like apologize and leave it at that, and then make those other points later, reflect on it, come out with an op-ed article or whatever you want to do to kind of reflect further on it, I think is totally appropriate and is a much more mindful way. But again, that's not what I'm seeing. It's that immediate, like, okay, one sentence apology, 5 paragraphs about what, my thoughts on it and the causes and what we can do and how I'm going to move forward and all of these different things. So yeah, I think that that's kind of the point that I'm making, is that if you're apologizing, leave it as an apology and then do the other work where it needs to be, and don't ask your accuser or your person that you violated to understand your intentions. You know what I mean? I think that that's not appropriate. They don't need to understand your intentions. I think other people, you need to understand your intentions and work on your own stuff. But bringing that to the person whose life you may have destroyed by your behavior is, again, you've lost you've lost the effectiveness of the apology at that point.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, as what is an apology. You are apologizing to someone else. It's about them. It's not about you, which is what you were saying. And I think the more you can see it through that lens and focus it through that lens, the more effective the apology will be. Because I feel like, especially on this topic, that's a lot of what we're seeing is, well, what's an effective apology? And this wasn't effective because of this, and that wasn't effective because of that. And I think it's because it's not being filtered through the intention of, and we're talking about intention, the intention to apologize. So right. Yes. So you have to set an intention for what you're trying to do, and then don't try to talk about other intentions of why that intention doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And I think the hard thing is that we're also seeing the effects of this society that we live in that has given powerful men this opportunity where they don't really have to, they're not expected to do that work. There's kind of an ability to gloss over that and kind of just not really have an expectation to do that kind of deeper, like, and to make, like, we live in a society where these powerful, men are conditioned to make everything about them. Mm-hmm. And so to like tell somebody, well, okay, this is apology, you've got to make this about the other person. It's like, well, but my career is going to fall apart. Like it's, I get why it's hard, because we've been conditioned into this society where it's like, no, you are the main, like what you're most important, And so I get that struggle, but I think, I don't know, I went off on the side, like that whole other layer, but
this issue is just so hard because it's so complex, and it's hard to wrap your brain around it, because it's exactly what you're saying, where it's such a conditioned thing. It's not a men problem. It's not a woman problem. It's a societal conditioning problem that both men and women help create every day.
Mm-hmm.
So so it's like, how do you then change it? Because it doesn't seem mindful. The solution is any man who ever was inappropriate with a woman just get fired and kind of banished, because then there's no incentive to change it from their perspective. Then you're just going to get more denying. But then it's also, you have to hold people accountable for their actions. So it's hard to analyze it from what'll be truly effective in creating meaningful change in that area, as opposed to things that will either just take us back to the status quo or just make us feel better right now, but not really change anything.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one thing that I do think has been a positive kind of mindful effect of all of this happening, effect of so much talk about it now, is that people are becoming more aware that there is a such thing as rape culture, that we do live in a
Hmm.
society that is conditioned in this way. I listen sometimes to the Breakfast Club. I'll watch their videos on YouTube, and Charlemagne the God made himself Donkey of the Day sometime last week because he said, I finally realized that I've been living in and grew up in and have been conditioned in this culture, and this is it was like mind blowing for him to kind of come to that realization and to actually talk about it. And so for me, for this um, huge voice in my community to be able to talk about that and have a conversation and then have callers come in and say, oh no, that's not true, and actually have mindful discussions about it and talk about it is really, really a positive thing because that term, a lot of people haven't even recognized that there was a reality that this is something that we've been dealing with. And so there are mindful discussions and kind of positive things happening, I think, as there's more awareness.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with that. It should be interesting to see kind of, I guess, uh, where it goes in the kind of the long term, because it's been kind of a short while where everything just kind of blew up, and I can kind of seeing it going two directions, because I think if women keep being more and more empowered to come out, you're just going to have so many, because it is part of our culture. You're just going to have so many allegations, and whether that starts to hold more and more weight or kind of starts to numb the situation, it should be interesting, because I can kind of see it going both ways. It seems like it's going not to the numbing place. And I
right now.
really hope it doesn't go there.
Right.
But
Right.
I mean, I do see it going there with some people. With some people, just I mean, I think I'm hearing more of that narrative of well, this is just standard how men are, or well, how our society is, and uh, but I think that's from a minority of people, and I think it's hard because I don't feel like it's been defined, uh, kind of the levels and what is the adequate, I guess, disciplinary action for rape versus making an inappropriate sexual comment versus this versus that, because
Hmm.
if it is, all of that stems from the same place and is part of that culture that's built. But in dealing with it, uh, we naturally have to kind of set, well, what is the punishment for each level of it. And right now it just seems like it's mostly, we're at the stage of calling people out. We're not really seeing the full, some people got fired, things like that, but we haven't seen what the real consequences long term are
Right.
for each person, depending on kind of where they're at. Because I think most people agree someone who is raping a bunch of women is it's a different thing than someone who was conditioned in a culture and then did a couple inappropriate things as a kid but then grew out of it. You
Hmm.
knew, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that those are the only two levels. There's like all ranging in it,
Right.
but they're
Right.
just they're different things in staying mindful in how we correct and help people who are going through that and their victims. It's just a different thing. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I think that part is so nuanced and diverse depending on what's going on. And I think
Right.
that's kind of up to that specific community and that specific kind of, whatever that their circle is to kind of decide what's appropriate and you know what I mean, and kind of manage that. But I think that, like, it's not easy to know what that's about. But I think the mindful response is just to continue to talk about and bring awareness and kind of just be with it where it's at in that moment, because you're right, we don't know where it's going to go. It could get to a point, like you said, where people are just kind of more numb. And I think that we can't really predict it right now because it's still very early. But if we continue to provide a space and provide permission for people to talk about it and to bring awareness to their own experiences, no matter what's going on, I think that will will move in some direction. Like something will
Right.
continue to happen as we continue to keep our eyes open and continue to be aware. It's that, locking it away. It's these, you know, behind the scenes lawsuits where $15 million are paid out, for harassment claims and things, and all of the stuff that's happening in secret and under the surface, that I think is what creates this toxic place where we've been. And so I think if we just can kind of continue to create spaces where people are not doing that, and people are like afraid to do that and afraid to have these, NDAs and things where people can't even speak on what happened to them, I think that that will help, empowering people to be honest rather than teaching people to remain silent.
Right. And specifically in the entertainment industry, I think that anyone who's in it sees a massive shift coming. It's already happening generationally, because a lot of the abuse and the hyper masculinity and that stuff that kind of dominated is very specific generation. And what we see now, and I think a lot of it has to do with there being much more access to creating content and much more content in different platforms, and artists can kind of pick and choose much more than they could ever in the past. That the diversity is coming whether the corporate side of it wants it or not. For example, I just produced a short film, and it was just so incredibly, a big part of it was that we wanted it to be gender balanced, because I was producing it with my writing partner who's a woman, and it was just something we both enjoy. And it's not even necessarily a political thing. I truly believe that in all my experiences, when your crew and everything is gender balanced, it's just more creative. You just have more perspectives. It's just a better experience. And every time I produce anything, it gets easier and easier because it's just becoming the norm. Like we had a male director, but he brought his crew, and his crew was just naturally diverse. So we didn't have to really worry about it. It wasn't where I even think when I first moved out to LA 4 years ago, it was something that was a challenge. You had to do a lot of work to be able to do that. And it's just, it's shifting, and
Yes.
you can feel it.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that shift. And I think that like you said, with that shift, it's creating a space for like that positive change to happen. And because I think when change happens, there's always resistance. And so I think kind of like recognizing that like there's going to be that resistance to that change, but like the more people are able to like create that space and open it up, then that resistance, it really doesn't matter. The change is going to happen no matter what. And and in that, I think like Hollywood, and the entertainment industry, actually, I think that they have a lot of space to create and model that change and really show what that looks like, because it is the entertainment industry and we're constantly consuming it. And so it's like that being that the entertainment industry is a lot of where it's coming out, and we're hearing about things, even though it happens everywhere. We're hearing more about it because of entertainers and because they're famous and have these platforms. And I think that's actually can be a helpful thing if the entertainment industry as a whole takes responsibility and recognizes that they are the model for how to kind of change this and how to move this forward, because all of our eyes are on that industry.
Right. And I mean, I think the big thing, I kind of mentioned it already, in the entertainment industry is at no other time have the creatives had so much power and choice. Because before it was basically there were only a couple networks that the executives kind of held all the power of who was being seen, who wasn't, what was being made. And now there's just so many platforms that a lot of people can pick and choose. And I see it all the time where there's a high profile female going through the ranks and is at a network that is not, she doesn't feel safe at, and she leaves to go to Netflix or Hulu. And in the industry, I think there's still kind of this idea that the network is the highest level, but as far as reach and influence in the entertainment industry, Netflix, Hulu is just as powerful right now. So you just see the choice now that creatives have, I think,
Yes.
will help the corporate side, because the corporate side is always just going to care about money and
Totally.
profits and what is there. But if they want someone who is going to say, well, I don't care about making the most money, I'd rather be some player that's safe, that's going to treat me as an equal,
Yep.
then their two thing is, well, we lose the money or we change our culture so these people come over. And I
Right.
think that is what we're going to start seeing, and
Yes.
then what
Yeah.
we're already seeing.
Right. And I think, you don't even have to go to the companies at all at this point. People can create their own content.
Right.
Now we live in a time where people create their own content. And so I look at like one of my biggest idols, Issa Rae, who created her own content and did her own work for years and now has a, HBO show with Insecure,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of recognizing that like now we're in a place where you can do something that you believe in a way that you believe in, and they'll end up coming to you,
Yeah.
and you can just kind of do your work and do it in a positive way. And then those network gatekeepers that were before closing the door to people who look like Issa and express things the way she does are now like, you know like stumbling over themselves to work with you. So that's a really cool thing too. And I think that ends up having to hold everybody else to a higher standard, because it's the same thing that's happening in the music industry. It's like people can do and produce and share their own stuff. And so the industry gatekeepers are having to rethink how they've done
Right.
things,
And I
which
think
is,
it's hard to, if we move, like we were talking about moving to a numb place or moving to a place that it's actually having effective change. And I think the thing that there is no going back from that I see is that women more and more are feeling empowered to speak up, which I think was the the second half of the problem. Half the problem is the hyper masculinized culture that abuses women, but the other half is the culture that suppresses women from feeling like they can speak up. And for me, right, I always knew that this was an issue, right? But because I grew up with a single mom and a sister, and I was around very powerful women all the time. I just naturally uh, have a high respect for women, and always I just naturally see equals. I don't see like a gender divide as much as I know a lot of other guys who were brought up in different environments do. And the thing was, I knew it was always an issue, but I didn't, I guess, uh, understand how much help and assistance was needed to fix it. But now, since people are being, women in general are being more vocal, it's almost empowering people who were allies but didn't understand the gravity of the situation for whatever reason to now participate in a meaningful way.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's everything you said. You touched on so much that resonates with me, but I think that point of that you can't know how to fix it if you don't ask the people who are affected by it and who are experiencing it. But I think we've always defaulted to the male voice and to that and to suppressing women's voices. And so recognizing that now we're actually starting to figure out how to deal with these things, because we're actually asking people who are experiencing it. Same thing is with race. And I won't go on a long, tangent with that, but it's the same thing. It's like we can't figure out how to help and deal with the issues of white supremacy and if we're not talking to people of color about their experiences and talking to
Right.
people who are actually dealing with it. And so I think you're right that this like, I'm calling it a goddess rising that we're kind of having in this last year or so, especially where women are really, really finding our voices. I know that that's something that's really been huge for me, is just recognizing like I have permission to speak on things. My opinion does matter and it's important. And not only does it matter, but it's vital, that like it's an important part of my role and my position here. And I think that's something that, like, the more we see that happening, the more we're able to kind of just naturally find the answers.
Right. Yeah, and the last thing I guess I want to say is just I think uh, it's no accident that all this stuff is happening now.
No.
And I see it all connected. You see this issue, you see it with race relations, you see it with Donald Trump being president. Is that the backlash to it, which I know a lot of people that I've seen on social media are that's the thing they're struggling with, is just seeing so much kind of negative response and hate towards it. And I mean, you always have two different sides, but I just like to remind people that what we're seeing now is really a struggle of a group that held power for hundreds of years, feeling like, and that's the key part of it, feeling like they're losing power. And they're trying to hold on to that power. So what I'm seeing a lot now is men freak out because women are speaking up, and then when the man tells them, kind of confronts them and expects them to then go back and retreat and be silent, the women aren't doing that anymore. Right. So now they don't know how to react. They feel like they have lost power, so that's the reaction you're seeing. And I feel like that's always the reaction that's going to happen. Exactly. So it's really about buckling down and kind of driving through that. And then that's kind of, once you drive through it for a while, I think is when the change starts to happen. But you have to make sure that that doesn't intimidate you and kind of push you back.
Right. And actually it totally cycles back to where we started with Facebook, which is that filtering out those comments, filtering that out, that's kind of, I think for me, how I move forward, and how I like keep going and keep trying to do that next brave thing and speak on topics that are difficult, is like recognizing I can't read all these comment sections. I can't look at all this negative, feedback, because that's expected. And like, I know that that's there. There's a quote, and I don't have it committed to memory, but there's a quote about, like, if you're talking about something, if nobody is reacting, then you're probably not saying anything. Right. I don't know the exact quote, but basically, like, there's going to be, people are going to be triggered by what you say if you're speaking about things that are important. And so just kind of, for me, filtering out that noise, not paying a lot of attention to it, and kind of just being mindful of what's important and kind of that next step forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you're talking about, it kind of goes back to us talking about the apology and the intention. And, I'm trying to it's interesting, because if you're trying to explain or defend your intention to someone else, that is it's very rarely a mindful thing to do. But trying to understand the intentions of others and how they're behaving with others or with you is very mindful. And that's what I try my best to do when I am engaging with people, is if I'm not agreeing and they're being very aggressive, I try to see, well, what's the intention? And that's where I start to see, oh, they're feeling like they're losing power and they're lashing out to try to hold on to that power. And once I understand that, it's much easier to engage mindfully or mindfully disengage, whichever is needed. But it's when I don't understand, when I go off on that they're angry and you shouldn't be angry and why are you against me, that's when it's hard for me to be mindful, as opposed to if I try to understand what their intention is first, then I can suss out how to respond. And it makes it less emotionally draining, because I don't then see it as an attack on me. I see it as, this person is feeling this way and has these insecurities and these issues, and that's why they're lashing out. It has nothing to do with me. They're not, it's not something I'm doing. It's something that they're doing to themselves. So it just allows you to cope better.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I actually have a quote that I really want to end with, because as we were talking about the apologies and just kind of, the change and how to kind of create change in these spaces, this quote came up and I remembered it, so I was able to pull it up. So this is from Tamika D. Mallory, who is one of the Women's March organizers. She's a activist as well, and so or activist. And so her quote is, "If you want to know how to get there, ask a woman. We know how to drive. We know how to draw the map and drive the car. If you really want to know how to get there, follow a woman of color."
Love it.
Love it. So I actually had a question for homework. I really want to know in our mindfulness in action page what people's relationship is with Facebook right now. I just want people to kind of share with us what is their relationship with Facebook, social media right now. Kind of where are they at with it? How are they using it? Do they feel like it's contributing? Do they feel like they're able to use it mindfully? If not, where are they at with it? Just kind of
Awesome.
curious.
Yeah, I love that. And you can let us know on Twitter or on our Facebook page or our Facebook group where we've been hanging out a little bit more at Mindfulness in Action Civil Discourse.
Yes. Thank you guys.
Have a great week.
Next time.